Welcome to another episode of Estate Planning Nightmares and How to Avoid Them, the show that highlights the importance of estate planning and why everyone needs to do it. And of course, the unfortunate consequences of what happens far too often if people have not planned. I'm your host, John Braddock, the author of Click Here When I Die, and the founder of My Life and Wishes, the Legacy Vault. It's an online planning and document storage solution created to make things easier for those you love. Today, I am joined by my good friend and fellow Arizonan, Marjorie Desmond of Desmond Law. Let me tell you a little bit about Marjorie. Marjorie is a personal family lawyer. She has a passion for families and making sure that their wishes are carried out if something happens to them. She chose to practice in a way that provides thoughtful, continuing estate planning care, providing a customized plan that continues to work for you and your family, even as your life changes, which is critically important, I might add. In her practice, she focuses on family protection, value-based planning, and planning for blended families. So whether you're married or single, a traditional family, or a blended family, starting out or just looking back on a life well lived, Marjorie will help you craft a plan that achieves your goals for your loved ones today and for years to come. From a background standpoint, she attended Stanford University for undergraduate education, and then Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, and was a note and comment editor on Law Review and published her own articles. After graduation, she practiced maritime law with a maritime law firm in Long Beach, California, and then moved to a larger law firm of Graham and James in Los Angeles, handling their maritime litigation and complex commercial litigation, which I don't understand any of that, folks, but maybe she can fill us in. She then segued into public service in 1998, taking a position with the U.S. Customs as House Counsel for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection before she moved to Arizona. Marjorie was admitted to practice law in California in 1992 and in Arizona in 2010 after moving to Scottsdale. She practiced commercial litigation in Scottsdale for several years before changing her focus to help people proactively plan to avoid litigation and protect their families through thoughtful estate planning. Why? After seeing a number of young families pass away, she wanted to make sure people had a plan for their families. Marjorie is passionate about helping people ensure their families will get through any emergency with as few legal problems as possible. She is admitted to 5 federal district courts, the United States Ninth Circuit, the Arizona and California bars, and was admitted to practice before the United States Supreme Court in 2019. She is also a member of Wealth Council and the Maricopa County Bar Association. Marjorie deeply enjoys contributing to her community, as she has volunteered with a number of organizations with and for her children as they were growing up, and her legal community in her professional capacity. In her spare time, not sure she has it, but in her spare time, she enjoys spending time with family, reading, traveling, playing classical piano, and horseback riding. Marjorie's been married for 30 years, has 2 adult children, and a horse named Sunny. Welcome, Marjorie.
Thank you so much, John, for the lengthy bio. It's getting longer every year, I swear, but it just makes me feel a little old, but but it has been a long time. Accomplished, experienced, I guess you could say.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, it's so great to see you again. We've known each other for, gosh, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now. We've done another show together, which was our Legacy and Libations about a year ago or so. And
that's right.
That was so much fun. So I was thrilled that you agreed after being on with me to come back. So,
oh, it's always fun to talk to you, John.
That's terrific.
So, and you're talking about my favorite subject, so it's a no-brainer for me.
Well, we are preaching to the same choir because my passion is making sure 1 million families don't go through some of the things that we experienced, and sadly, some of the things that I see continue to experience in other families along the way, all of which is totally avoidable, as you know.
Yes. Well, my
So,
favorite saying is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And certainly that is true in the estate planning world, because what attracted me to it in the first place is just the ability to prevent a very, some very big and expensive and time-consuming problems by just doing a little planning ahead of time. And that's what lured me away from litigation, because I saw so many people so sad to have to go through the litigation process. And I don't think I've met anybody who really wants to have to sue someone or likes being sued. So it's an expensive and lengthy process that is very grueling and emotionally draining. And I wanted to help people proactively prevent the problems from happening in the first place. So that's kind of how I got involved in estate planning, and my passion for families and for kids, and for making sure that they get through the process with as little inner conflict as possible.
absolutely. And it's so admirable. The thing about it is, I always say estate planning is such a proactive field. Uh, it seems like all the other practice areas of law, there's always court involved, right? There's litigation, there's
Right. Those are
fighting, and those
reactive.
things. Right.
Something goes wrong, something very bad happens. Whether it's a
Exactly.
crime or a tort or, some big contract breach or something terrible. Once it gets to the court process, then it has already happened. And this is an area where you can actually prevent the problems from happening in the first place. And that's
Yeah.
my goal.
And keep them out of court.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Uh, yeah. I love it. I love talking about passion, and which is why I just love talking to estate planning attorneys. And, passion for me is the why, behind, what it is that people do, why they get up every day. And it also helps our audience understand who we're talking better to. And I know that in your bio, you mentioned, your transition after seeing young parents pass away. Can you elaborate just a touch on that? And is that your why?
Yes, actually it is. And there's a very personal aspect to that too. And that is that my grandfather served in World War II, and which only makes me feel ancient, but anyway, he was overseas when my uncle was born, and my dad was already a little young boy, and then he got killed overseas. So he had left his death benefit to his father and brother. And so basically what happened, he wasn't expecting to die. None of us are, but unfortunately it's 100% chance that we're all going to go someday. And he passed away. His death benefit, his father had predeceased him. So it all went to his brother, and his brother did not care for his widow and his children. And so my grandmother had to move with her 4-year-old and newborn in with her mother, who lived on a farm without running water. And they lived there for several years while my grandma was trying to figure out how to continue life with these 2 small children that she now had to raise by herself without the death benefit that rightfully should have gone to her. And I can, one of those days when I finally see him again, I will ask him why. I'm just thinking that maybe he had done the designation prior to his marriage or prior to the birth of his children. I don't know. That's always the big question. But it really created a real hardship in my father and uncle's lives as they were growing up without a father and without support. So, I mean, not that the death benefit was much in those days, but it certainly would have helped them along their way. But anyway, so once we moved to Arizona, I stayed home with my kids for some years, and was PTO president of a large school here in Scottsdale. And during that time, there were 8 parents of elementary age kids who had died of various things. Everything from, car accidents to different types of cancer to flesh-eating bacteria to various things. And those were all a surprise. I mean, no one expects a young person to die, period. And they did. They had kids. I saw how it went very poorly. I mean, even if there was money, if the money was all in the deceased spouse's name, then there had to be a probate process. And so, you know, certainly we can make that a lot easier for people and make it so that it really is very simple to administer. And so I just wanted to help those families that go through something like that, no matter what the age they are, because it's hard enough to lose a loved one. And certainly you don't want it to also be a financial burden as well. So that was really the motivating factor for me for both of those incidences in my life. So, and then of course, having done years and years of litigation, I know full well what the litigation process is like. So I wanted to make sure that people didn't have to go through that when they were also suffering the loss of a loved one.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's very important. You know, again, the reason I call the show Estate Planning Nightmares is that I found the best way to get people thinking about their own planning is through stories, right? I mean, stories get people's attention and real stories. Not necessarily scare them, but, you know, maybe a little if they haven't planned, but to get folks to think about the realities of what may happen, you know, if they don't plan. And, you know, you're right. There is 100% chance we're going to die. You know, 1 out of 1 of us. No one gets out of here alive, right? So, so we know that's going to happen. You know, why 50% of the population chooses not to make a plan, I'll never know, but we're here to change that. So again, I think stories can help change people's thought process and attitude about these things. And
yeah,
you know,
I think so, John.
Yeah, you know, and that's what we're here for. It's education, right? And so, with all your years of experience in helping families, I know you've seen a lot of the the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So,
Absolutely.
can you share a story or two or something with us and our audience that might be eye-opening?
Well, I think that people, once they get past the I don't have anything and now I have an estate plan, and oftentimes that might be the birth of a child and setting up an estate plan where they've named guardians for those kids because they don't want child protective services to end up having to step in. And so they might set up a plan when their children are born. And then they think, great, I've done it. It's done. Check that box. And don't want to have to do it again. It's not top of mind. I figure that I've checked that box. And the thing that happens in our lives is our lives continue to change. And whether you want them to or not, the kids grow up, things in their lives change. They're either responsible or not. They either have a spouse they like or not. They may have their own spending problems, medical problems, whatever it is. They might be special needs and receiving benefits because of their special needs. And so we have this kind of ever-changing dynamic of what we're looking at when we're doing the planning. And so when people think, I've done it, check, what they're not realizing is what they set up might not be at all what they want 10, 20, 30 years later. And the other part of that is that the law changes too. So even if the documents were perfect when they were created and perfectly set forth your wishes, the law might have changed. There might be tax code changes. There might be different things that happen as a result of either having or not having certain language in your trust. So I guess I would just say this story is kind of about a couple who had a plan and they'd gone to a lawyer in Chicago and they thought they'd done it. Okay, great. We have our estate plan. And the way things are done there, and you know, maybe I don't want my Illinois lawyer friends to call into your show and complain. But anyway, all I know is what I saw. And so they came into my office. They had moved to Arizona. Now, anytime someone moves to a new state, it's a good idea to have your plan looked at. You might have changes as to who makes medical decisions for you if something happens to you. There might be changes in phone numbers. There might be name changes in your kids. You might have your kids in different aspects of their lives, making them more or less likely to now be able to help you. So they dutifully came into my office and they said, okay, we've decided to move to Arizona and we have these Illinois trusts. And it was a husband's trust and a wife's trust. And I think that is to deal with them not having community property in Illinois. I'm not going to say anything about Illinois law because I don't know it, but in Arizona, we're a community property state. And anyway, so they came to me with two trusts, his trust and her trust. Now, one of the clients had worked at a law firm as a paralegal or administrative assistant or something. And so thought they knew everything and they knew what they needed. So they came to me and I said, okay, definitely needed to update terms, but things, so things hadn't changed so much because they had adult kids at this point. So I said, well, you can just make a Band-Aid change and just amend, a couple of paragraphs here and there, or you can have me restate the whole thing and really simplify it for you. And they said, oh, no. They knew what was best. They just wanted the Band-Aid fix. And so they were insistent on that. And obviously I'm, not going to force planning on people that, and I thought, well, maybe it's a financial consideration or something. So fine, we did a Band-Aid fix. And then several years later, one of them got sick. That spouse ended up dying. Within 2 weeks, her spouse died too. So, and that's actually, it's called the widowhood effect. And oftentimes, especially when you're a caregiver for someone who's ill, you don't take as good a care of yourself as you might otherwise. You might put off going to the doctor for yourself because you're caring for a loved one. And either from, some people say a broken heart, but some, it might just be a lack of care or a just end of your desire to live. These spouses went very quickly. So what ended up happening is when we looked at the situation once both of them were gone, we had a husband's trust that had to be administered because it had assets in it, a wife's trust that had to be administered. Then there was an extra account that the wife had that wasn't in either trust. So that ended up being a little probate process. And then the wife had another account that had just her husband as the beneficiary. So then it would pass from her estate, essentially, to his estate. And then the company that was holding that money, and this is very interesting because this was, I think, new in my practice to me. The company holding the money said, okay, I get it that the holder of the money is gone and the beneficiary is gone. In those cases, we had a contract with people who deposited their money with us. And I'm guessing that was an adhesion contract that they signed, 30 years before. And that contract provides that if there's no beneficiary, the money will be distributed to the biological children of the beneficiary that's named and predeceases. Okay, so it didn't go through probate. It went through this contractual provision that no one knew about. So the interesting wrinkle here is that this couple had disinherited one of their children. So they didn't have a good relationship, hadn't been in contact for decades or more, and they had intentionally left that one child out of their plan. So now here we've got this company that's holding money. that says, well, we have this contract that no one knew about saying that we will distribute equally to all of your biological children. So it doesn't even go through a will-based process, and it isn't their choice. And so that money was then distributed to all of their children. Now you can imagine what that would have looked like if the two parents had different biological children, or maybe a biological child that they had adopted out and they had no relationship with, or maybe it was a biological child they didn't even know about. I mean, you can run down some scenarios that would have just been crazy. If it was a blended family and they decided to treat all the kids the same, and then now they're saying, well, no, it's this one parent's biological children, and so only half the kids get the money. I mean, you can imagine what that would look like. So at the end of the day, the poor kids who are now mourning the loss of their parents had two trust administrations, had a small estate affidavit, and a probate proceeding as well, because there was another account that also didn't make it in for the husband, that didn't make it into the trust. So I guess there's several lessons to be learned. One is to make sure you update your estate plan so that it really does reflect changing family relationships. And then also to review your assets to make sure that they are all properly titled. And so one of the things that we do is we do an asset spreadsheet, so that if I'm hit by a bus, the person picking up my estate planning binder will see where all the accounts are. And I know, of course, on your software, you can have logins to those accounts. You can indicate, and then once people can log into them, they can see what the exact balances are. And you can list all the banks, all the life insurance policies on your website. You can download the policies themselves. So they've got the policy number, they've got the 800 number. And we just provide that spreadsheet as a courtesy to our clients so that we can also use it as a checklist for checking trust funding. And, I don't know if people know what we mean by trust funding, but basically trust funding means that if your trust is like a bucket, the funding part is taking your assets and putting them inside the bucket. So it means retitling your house, changing your checking and savings account to say, for example, the Desmond Family Trust instead of just Marjorie and Bob Desmond. So
same for beneficiary designations on life insurance policies.
Absolutely.
401ks.
And so we indicate on this spreadsheet whether it's something that has beneficiaries or it's something that's in the trust. And that way you can know how things pass. So you can end up, if you don't take care of those details, you can end up with some real messes. And so one of the things that we do is we meet with our trust clients every 3 years. And it's a complimentary meeting, and it's part of their greater estate planning process. And in that meeting, we go over, okay, this is what we have set up. Nothing goes to your kids until they're 40. Do you still want that provision? Or is 30 now okay because they're 30 and they're healthy and responsible? Or do you say, oh no, one of my kids was just checked in and this is another true story, into rehab. So they shouldn't be getting any money until they are clean and sober. And so they wanted to change what the instructions were for that trust that would go to that child, and whether that they want that child as a successor trustee, which is certainly not a good idea. So all those things kind of requires a relook. And a lot of times 3 years later is when we really can bear down on the things that they hadn't put into their trust, or the beneficiary designations they hadn't checked. And so, I mean, we can talk ourselves blue in the face, but it really does give the client some space. They're like, okay, fine, we've had a little time to settle here, and now let's circle back around and make sure everything's funded properly.
Wow, it's interesting because people don't think about it. I mean, first of all, if you don't have an estate plan, well, in your story, these people had an estate plan. It had some flaws in it, which at the end of the day was expensive. It involved probate, and it involved three surviving children, two of whom probably absolutely hated the third, who ended up getting a massive chunk of money. And people who think a death in the family brings family members closer together are misled a little bit, because
That's right.
it can be the most divisive time. I speak with people all the time who say they have family members they have not spoken with for 10 years following a death of a loved one.
Well,
And
and
that's personally not the legacy I want to leave for my
no, and
family.
that's something that we think a lot about in doing the planning process, who you're appointing in the jobs. So who are you appointing your successor trustee? And to be careful about appointing a child, because even if we think the child's great, maybe they marry someone who's yakking in their ear, you're not going to let your brother get away with this, and I think we need to keep this, or whatever. And it might not be the most helpful banter. And so a lot of times, depending on the relationship between the kids, we will recommend outside fiduciaries whose whole job in life is to administer trust. They know what they're doing. They know how to do it. They don't get any money except for their fee that they're paid. And so they don't have any of the drama that can occur in families. And the problem that happens with these family fights is usually they involve lots of money, and the person holding them together is gone. So the gloves are off, and those relationships have a very small chance of repair. So they are really relationship ending. And that's just really sad.
Yeah, really, as parents, I mean, you're a parent, I'm a parent, our listeners likely are parents. Our kids fight, right? We're growing up, they fight all the time. They can't agree on a gosh darn thing. They can't agree on what we're having for dinner, what movie we're going to go see, those kind of things. So to think that if I die, my children are all going to agree and be on the exact same page is
With
100
potential spouses.
with spouses is 100% disaster. So that's why the planning is so important on the front end. Is I don't want my kids fighting when they're growing up or even now as an adults. The last legacy I want to leave is one of family discord and and potential separation and never talking to each other again.
Right.
And then if I do have the plan in place, as you know, I moved here 6 years ago from Wisconsin. Um, a lot of people move down here to God's waiting room. And so all our Arizona listeners, if you're, moving here for your, golden years and things, how critically important it is to make sure that that your plan is up to date and current, and not just if you're moving here, but it's a continual process. A trust or an estate plan is never a set it and forget it kind of a thing.
And I always tell my clients to look at who they've appointed for all the jobs every year. There are those, and if you're wondering what those jobs possibly are, they're the powers of attorney that protect you while you're alive and incapacitated. So alive and unable to make decisions for yourself. So those are your medical and your financial powers of attorney, and your living will and HIPAA waiver and some other things. And then there are the people taking care of things once you're gone. And that would be your personal representative of your will and the successor trustees of your trust. And so really making sure that all the people that you have, you're still talking to, you still have a good relationship with, that they have the time, because it might be that you've appointed your daughter and now she's a doctor and it doesn't have 5 seconds. And even though she's a responsible adult, she just doesn't have the time or bandwidth to now take on the administration of an estate. And that they're still alive and able to do the job. So I think that and that doesn't require an estate planning attorney. It's just looking at who you've got in your plan and whether you still want them there. And if you do, great. And if things have changed, then it's time to think about, getting those changes put into place so that if something happens to you, they're all the way you want them to be.
Yeah. I'll give you, this is, and this doesn't come close to an estate planning nightmare, but it's a funny story, so I'm going to share it. So, true story about the importance of why things should be updated, right? So when Michelle's dad died 10 years ago, and again, it was, scavenger hunt from hell. It took us 10 months digging through boxes and all kinds of stuff. And like, we're not finding anything. Well, somewhere in this process, I'm digging through his office, going through boxes and stuff. And I yell out to Michelle, who's digging through boxes in another room. And I said, "Hey, honey, I've got good news. I've got bad news." She said, "Well, what's the good news?" I said, "Well, the good news is I found Dad's will." She's like, "Okay, what's the bad news?" I said, "The bad news is you need to move to Milwaukee and live with Aunt Jean and Uncle Ed." Okay, that tells you how old that document was, right? So again, it wasn't an estate plan, it wasn't a trust, everything's still probate. His wife was still alive at the time, so they didn't have a lot of assets, so the whole process was not that difficult. But the humorous part is, really, you hadn't updated that in 40 years?
And even for those young parents who have set up guardians for their toddlers, and maybe those guardians are their parents, because they're the closest people they know who would raise these small children. That might be a lot different when you're now talking about teenagers. The parents are 15 years older, and maybe they have medical things going on, and maybe they just have less energy, which is most likely the case. And at that point, the parents can then, of the children, can then have those conversations with their kids. And we had one of those conversations with our 16-year-old son. And we said, okay, if mom and dad got hit by a bus tomorrow, and he's thinking, oh dear, why are we talking about this? Where would you want to go? And we gave him some options, and he surprised us. I mean, we were shocked. We said, wow, you wouldn't want to stay in Arizona where you were born, where all of your friends live, at the high school you're going to, and you wouldn't want to live with friends and continue on at your high school? Because at this point he was driving. And he said, Mom, he looked at me like, ugh. And he said, Mom, if I had just lost both of my parents, do you think what high school I'm going to would be a big deal? And I thought, wow, okay, it's a very mature response. But I think it's comforting to kids nowadays to know that mom and dad have a plan, that they've talked about it. It's like having an escape route if your house catches on fire. No one wants to use it, but for heaven's sakes, it can be life-changing if you have one and everybody knows what it is. So I think it's comforting to those kids to be able to have some input too, as long as you think their choices are rational and you've had a chance to go over it with them. I mean, maybe give them some limited choices. And
Personally, I would have said, hey,
really...
hey, Mom, how much money am I getting? Because that might determine if I'm going to Hawaii for the rest of my life or not, right?
You could just say, well, you have to be 30 before you get anything.
Yeah. Hawaii is going to be 14 years down the road, son.
That's right.
And it's contingent upon finishing high school.
That's right. Well, then also as our kids get older, and both of my kids are now adults, maybe it's time to start putting them in some of those roles that they weren't in before. So maybe you have your generation people helping with the first decisions as to who's going to be successor trustees, who's going to do power of attorney, who's going to do medical powers of attorney. But once your kids are adults, now maybe they're going to be filling those roles. And maybe some of your siblings, well, your parents might be gone. Maybe your siblings aren't going to be able to do it, or your friends. I mean, we start getting older and start seeing that our kids are responsible, and it's time to pass the torch if anything happens to us. So
exactly. And we just have to decide who's the most responsible and those kind of things. But
that's right.
We'll figure it out.
Or who's going to pull the plug or not pull the plug at the right time.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh.
God. Well, this has really been great. Very insightful to understand the importance of, obviously updating your plan, on a continual basis and making sure it's funded correctly. And for heaven's sakes, if you're, moving here from another state and you're not going back to the other state, have those plans reviewed, updated, on a regular basis. It's just so important because.
And one thing that, just real quick, if you're moving here from another state, chances are, and you have an estate plan, chances are your estate plan is applying the law of the state that you moved from. So now you could be living, let's just say Arizona, for example, and let's say you've moved here from Illinois, and now your will says that if it's in probate, the court is supposed to be applying Illinois law. So now you're basically asking an Arizona court to apply Illinois law, which they don't know anything about. So that causes problems too. So it's just important to make sure the proper law applies. And especially if you're moving here from a state that had inheritance tax, you absolutely want to make sure that you're domiciled in your new state where there isn't inheritance tax, for example, if that's the case. So
yeah. Well, I know for a fact New Jersey has inheritance tax, or at least it did when my uncle died a number of years back. So if any of y'all moved here from New Jersey,
a lot of the East Coast states do. So that's another thing. It's important to just know what the law is on that subject. But
absolutely. So insightful, and thank you. I know we're up against our time, but I do want to take some time to say, hey, how can our listeners get a hold of you if they just have general questions or they need some assistance with their estate planning matters?
Well, my website has a lot of questions and answers on it, and that's a good place to start. It also has a lot of resources. There's a whole resource tab of different places you can go for different things. And that is www.azlegacylawyer.com. And a lot of the resources are, nationwide applicable resources, but the law, of course, applies to Arizona. And then, of course, you can, my phone number's on the website too. So that's a good place to start.
Oh, perfect. And Marjorie, thank you so much. I always love our conversations. Appreciate you being on our show today. Great insight into planning. And I, along with our listeners, are certainly grateful for your time. A huge shout out to all of you, our audience, for joining us once again. Please feel free to reach out to Marjorie with whatever questions or concerns you have. I have included all of her contact information that she mentioned in the bottom of the show notes, so it's there for your convenience. And as always, my good friends, your life is your legacy. So plan ahead and make it a great day.